If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today I'm joined by a true change maker in the autism community. Diagnosed at 10 years old, Kaelynn Partlow has carved a path as a therapist, advocate and storyteller. She's lead technician at Project Hope Foundation, a speaker, a social media influencer and a published author. Her book, Life on the Bridge, Linking My Life as an Autistic Therapist, offers profound insights into her experiences of both an individual on the spectrum and a professional supporting others. We're diving today into her inspiring journey, her book, and a mission to build bridges of understanding and inclusion. So, Kaelynn, thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to speak to you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I discovered you. The influencer thing is kind of where I first came across you, and I saw loads and loads of posts coming out where you're offering this invaluable insights and invaluable information to individuals, on the autistic spectrum and supporting those individuals on the autistic spectrum. I didn't know at that point that you were famous and had been on a Netflix TV series at that point. I just thought, hey, this person's giving out some gold. So I wanted to reach out, and then obviously I did a bit of research and found out that you were a Netflix superstar. So how did you get involved in that initially? And then we'll really dive into what's taken you in your career.
Sure. Everybody kind of expects it to be some, incredible story. And I kind of wish that it were, but unfortunately it's not. I saw a Facebook post about casting for Love on the Spectrum. I had seen the Australian version. And, it's one of those things you think, well, why not? Who could it hurt, right? You fill out the application, you send the email, and you don't really expect anything of it, right? But then a couple days later, I had gotten a response, and then there was a Zoom interview and another Zoom interview. And the next thing I know, the Netflix crew is at my house, ready to film. And so, the process kind of moves quickly, and it's one of those things you don't expect to happen, but it does. And it's kind of a crazy thing.
Right. So were you already a therapist at that point, or a
Yes.
technician, or is it, so you're already doing that side of things? So
Yep.
Has it opened new doors for you though? Has it changed things a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. They kind of told us a little bit that our social media would maybe get a little bit more attention, but they didn't prepare us to what degree that our social media platforms would really explode, and mine did. When I started it, I had maybe 500 followers on just a personal Instagram account. And I'm at almost 500,000 right now. So it's just, the response has been insane. And so I kind of knew that I needed to expand my content. I had shared some autism memes or whatever, things just that were lighthearted and funny. But once you get a following like that, I kind of felt maybe a responsibility sort of to share things that were a bit more informative to an audience that was continuing to grow.
Yeah, that sounds like a really positive thing. I take it a lot of the people who reached out to you or started following you, it was a very kind of positive interaction. They'd sort of seen you on the show and related to you in some way and therefore, or just wanted to understand more about the way you saw the world.
Yeah, it was very positive. Everybody was very kind for the most part.
I'm sure there's some not so nice, but that's the nature of, that's the nature of the internet, isn't it, I suppose. So had you already written the book when you went on the show, or is that something that's happened afterwards?
No, that's something that's happened after. Again, people were really enjoying my content and I wanted to have something more permanent. Not everybody consumes social media at a high rate. And even when they do, a lot of times people would say, well, do you have any videos on dealing with change? Or do you have any videos on helping people get through meltdowns? And I do, but maybe I filmed it 6 months ago. And it's kind of difficult to scroll back through all these things. So I wanted to kind of compile things all in one place so it'd be easy for people to find.
So tell us a little bit about the title of the book. What's the kind of meaning behind it? Is it just bridging the world between the therapist, the technician, you, and the life experience, or is there more to it?
There's a little bit more to it. I feel like it's kind of multifaceted. A lot of people who have autism, especially people like me who are very language abled and don't struggle as much with the verbal communication, kind of see ourselves as being too weird to be different, but too normal to be weird, which is mostly politically incorrect way of saying that we don't feel as though we fit in with disabled peer groups. We don't really fit in with non-disabled peer groups either. We're kind of sitting in the middle. And I guess what I had to learn, maybe the hard way, was that the bridge wasn't meant to be a life sentence in limbo. It was really more meant to be a way to kind of connect the two communities, both the non-disabled group of people and the people with disabilities, specifically autism, and kind of run messages between the group because I can use my lived experience as well as my language abilities to kind of bridge the gap, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose it's that speaking out as an advocate that you can, that bridge of communication, I suppose, isn't it, as well? Is part of the
connecting the two worlds that are not usually connected.
Do you think that whole concept is something that's kind of informed you and helped you on your journey as a technician?
Oh, absolutely. I used to joke that I have information and learned things through personal experience that my coworkers who are also therapists can only read about in books. And there's only so much understanding you can get from an academic setting, which is not to say that it's useless because there's, certainly value in it. But it's a lot different than having lived it yourself and then helping somebody else get through those same sorts of struggles.
Do you find it makes it easier for you to connect and relate to some of the individuals you work with then, whereas some of your colleagues may find it harder at times?
Oh, certainly. I think I've had to kind of explain to my colleagues, what these sorts of struggles can feel like on the inside. We all can observe what someone is going through maybe on the outside, but to know what it feels like on the inside is kind of a different experience.
So who is it that you tend to support? Who is it that you work with a lot of the time?
I certainly have my preferences. I work at a nonprofit organization that serves across the lifespan, which is kind of unusual because at least here in the States, a lot of service providers will stop providing autism supports once a person turns 21. But autism doesn't stop after 21. And so what's unique about Project Hope where I work is, our youngest clients are maybe 2 or 3 years old. And our oldest person, I think, is like in his 60s. So we don't just stop once a person turns 18. And of that age range, I tend to like teenagers, which is the group that lots of people don't want to work with because teenagers are kind of rotten, if we're being honest. But I enjoy teenagers a lot, actually. I struggled a lot as a teen, and I feel that I have a lot of empathy towards the struggle that is being an adolescent.
Is there quite a number of the individuals that you're supporting and working with? Are they sometimes coming quite late to a diagnosis as well? Or is it usually individuals?
Not usually.
No. So they've usually had a diagnosis earlier in life. Because I know the age of 10 that you were is obviously quite a typical age for a sudden increase in diagnosis at that particular time in life, isn't it? Typically in the UK, particularly, it's the time we're going into what's called secondary school. So the kind of high school for you guys, there's a lot more social pressures and things like that. That's where it seems to be. The masking doesn't seem to be able to hold up quite as well. And that's where that's where it tends to get picked up a little bit more, that they're struggling. So what is it about teenagers that you enjoy working with then?
It sounds terrible, but a lot of times, teenagers will come in and they kind of have a bad attitude, and I appreciate it. I feel like I come across as very positive and optimistic online. And to those people who think that I sound very positive, I would like to say that I am practical, but I am not an optimist. I will give you a practical solution to a problem, but I certainly don't see it in an optimistic way. I just don't always share those parts. And so I can kind of appreciate the bad attitude that the teenagers come in with, because on the inside, that's how I feel as well.
Oh, fantastic. So would you say that you're able to, an element of your social media is still your masking self? It's still it's an art, it's a performance to some degree.
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah, obviously it's still your authentic self, but it's a case of it's a bit like customer service, version. yeah, absolutely, like customer service, plastering on the smile, and here you go, because nobody just wants to see you grumpy right. or being like a grumpy teenager.
Yeah, no one would appreciate that part, I promise.
So as I was looking through the book, and I have to be honest, I haven't had a proper chance to read it because
Me neither.
I've kind of skimmed. I haven't read mine either. I've kind of read it quite a bit, and there's some really nice chapters in there. And what I noticed that you've quite often included some kind of practical activities and exercises that you can allow people to kind of better relate or better understand. Is that kind of in line with some of the stuff you do on a day-to-day as far as your living, or is that more your social media side of things? Where's that come from?
It definitely comes from my work. We are the let's do something about it type of therapy. We're not the sit around and talk about your feelings type of therapy. We're here to listen to your feelings, but we're going to do something about it. And so I guess it just kind of comes from my work because it's all very practical. It's very actionable. If somebody struggles with conversation, we're not going to sit around and, sympathizing is great, but we've got to find a solution. If somebody is wanting to get better at conversation, we've got to hand them some practical strategies. And so that's what we do here. And it definitely carries over into my work everywhere else.
There's some really nice bits in there as well. And I'm going to touch on a few areas. I know that one area you got complimented on, you met one of your heroes, didn't you? I saw that there was an interview with yourself in August of Temple Grandin that was, and she was complimenting the chapter and complimenting your book on the area around communication.
Yeah.
What would you say on a day-to-day then? And I agree with you. It's quite unusual. That spectrum of people that you are working with, the age range of people you're working with is quite rare. Typically within the environments I've worked in, it's either children or adults, and rarely do you get that continuation. But I suppose there's I take it some individuals stay with you for quite a long period of time through that journey, or do they stay with you only temporarily?
No, they can stay as long as they like. What's kind of another thing that's unique is I actually attended Project Hope as a student for high school. So really, I've been with the organization since I was 13 and I'm 27 now. And I'm not unique in that. There are lots of people who have been here even longer than me, or just as long as I have. There are clients here who remember when I was a student, which is really, really cool.
Okay, so what would you say are typically the biggest challenges that some of the people that you're working with are encountering on a day-to-day that they need that support and help with?
The kids that I work with specifically, we've got several campuses across the upstate of South Carolina. For where I work specifically, I'm in a school setting. So a lot of the kids are pretty fluent in language and communication. A lot of their difficulty is in the area of social skills. So things that are very difficult can be compromising with others, working in a group, managing kind of your own coping strategies as it relates to other people. So if you learn that, when someone is very loud, you could ask them to quiet down. That is one coping strategy, but it doesn't work every time. So kind of expanding on that and building on that can be challenging for people at first.
Right. Okay. And do you find it changes over the kind of individual's lifetime, or is that one of the sort of ongoing challenges all the time?
Oh, sure. And once people learn skills, they will progress, and maybe they'll come in contact with new barriers that, weren't challenging before. So, for example, I worked with a young man who was really wanting to work on his conversation skills and had made some pretty measurable improvements in that area. But then, kind of the next phase of life was getting a job. And so learning to follow multi-step directions was the next challenge that he had to face. So things definitely evolve over time, which is, I guess, the benefit of providing that lifespan of services is that we can kind of adapt with the person's needs.
It's quite an interesting thing I want to ask you. And this is an area of there's an area of sometimes controversy around the neurodivergent community as far as, I'm going to use the term deficit, but I'm only using it for the context. So you've come across it as well, as far as like being referred to as kind of whether it be social deficits or communication deficits. So that gives an element that there is this not good enough about it. And actually it's just different. So it's neurodiversity fitting into a neurotypical world. And therefore, and I quite often use the analogy, and it'd be amazing to hear whether you agree with it or not. It's sometimes like they speak French, but we may speak German, but it's about finding that common language. And it's about helping them, if they choose and they want to speak German to engage, then we should help them and teach them the language. But that doesn't mean they're not good enough just because they only speak French. I don't know whether that analogy kind of maps across for you, but it's quite interesting to hear how you're teaching these life skills. But I think there's a certain part of the, I don't know whether the community itself or sometimes certain spokespeople that I hear from the community, that, I mean, they should be accepted unconditionally for who they are. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I don't know. I feel like my thoughts on that are relatively complex. I think initially it sounds nice and it can be very true for many people. But there's a large section of people for whom this is not true and is just kind of a flowery bit of language that just doesn't hold up for them. I think in the school setting where I work, a lot of times it can be true where it's not that it's, they're deficient in social skills. They have different social skills. And so when you get a bunch of people together who have different social skills, sometimes it can be a very beautiful thing. They kind of socialize in ways that feel natural to them. They engage in ways that feel natural to them. And they have really wonderful relationships that might look a little bit different, but are still very valuable. However, the flip side is, even for those of us who have strong language abilities, sometimes when you get a bunch of people in a room who think very differently, there is quite a bit of disconnect in how to connect and what is the right way to be with somebody. And so maybe we've got someone speaking French and we've got someone speaking German and we've got someone speaking Italian and we've got someone speaking Russian, and nobody wants a translator and everyone thinks the other one is wrong. And so it really just, I hate to say the cliche, but it really just depends on the individual. But as a general statement, I would say that is probably untrue. Just in my vast experience with people on the spectrum, that I don't know that the deficits model is always helpful in every instance, but to say that it's just different is kind of minimizing, I would say.
I agree. I think I've come across that barrier, and I think it's taking something away. We're all learning all the time. It doesn't mean that we're not good enough, but it doesn't mean there's never room for improvement. And I thought, or to make our life easier. And as you said, it's wonderful if we can all speak our own languages, but to have a socially cohesive society, we need at least some level of common language to kind of be able to work with each other and connect with each other. So one of the things that you talk about in the book, actually, as far as a key communication skills, but also about social boundaries and things like that, or managing social interactions. Obviously, we're heading towards the Christmas period, which is although this may come out just after Christmas, which would be a bit of a shame. But this could be a particularly challenging time for those on the autistic spectrum, as well as a wonderful time in other ways. But what's your kind of main challenges you find that the individual support, and maybe even yourself, find at this time of the year?
Personally, I think myself and a lot of the people I work with struggle with the change in routine. We're not maybe going to school, we're not going to work, we've got people visiting from out of town. The whole thing is just kind of thrown off, and that can certainly create some challenges, especially when people don't have the language skills to be able to communicate what they need. Even if you are out of routine, maybe you need to watch TV at a certain time or sit in a specific place when you eat dinner. And if you are struggling to communicate that, you're going to have a really, really hard time over the holidays. And like you said, it could be a challenging time and it could also be a wonderful time. But that change in routine, I think, is one of those bigger, more pervasive issues that lots of us face during this time.
So what kind of advice do you give to either parents or individuals themselves that can kind of help them to kind of cope with this time of year?
I think it's helpful to have kind of an order of events. And I say order of events and not scheduled because a lot of times, as much as we might like to adhere to a strict schedule, most people around us do not. So a loose order of events that kind of evens out everybody's expectations can be really helpful. So for example, grandma's coming to visit, we are going to all eat dinner, then we're going to watch a movie, and then it'll be bedtime. And kind of, I wouldn't necessarily assign specific times to it, but just a loose order of events can help people prepare and kind of be on guard for some of those routines that might be disrupted.
Yeah. Do you advocate for any kind of specific ways for that to be communicated that works for different people?
Some people do just fine to see it written out. Some people are fine with just kind of a discussion with somebody beforehand. And other people might need something more intense, like a picture schedule, especially if reading is challenging. So whatever way a person can best absorb that information, do it that way.
One of the other things I think this time of year is kind of social expectations. And that's one of the that's the chapter in the book I was thinking of, as far as there is, I think, so if I give you an example, so when I was fostering, I had a young lad within my care who was on the spectrum. And one of the things that we had a terrible Christmas, because one time he got a present. Santa had brought a present, but it was a box of cars, but one of the cars in the box was not the one that he wanted or expected. And that he really struggled with that. And it kind of then affected that day for him. And obviously then it had a knock-on effect to everybody else as well. The following year, we decided to do things a little bit differently, which was to, as soon as the adverts for toys started coming on the TV, we then took him down to the toy shop and said, you get to choose your main present now. It was probably about October time, something like that, October, November. So he got to choose his special present, his key present. He didn't get it straight away. It went into a cupboard on the top shelf. He used to occasionally come in and just go kind of look at it and check it's still there. And he'd have a look at it and he was happy with that. But because we shifted that, managing his expectations, he didn't like the surprise. It didn't make him happy. It didn't something that he enjoyed, which is something I really relate to. I hate surprises. I don't like not knowing what I'm getting. It just causes me more anxiety and distress than the enjoyment of then the surprise at the end of it. It's just not worth it for me. But there's such an expectation, isn't there, as far as this time of the year, of you are going to have fun at the families. You are going to enjoy the presents you get. And I think presents particularly is a big area of challenge. So I wondered whether you'd come across that. Did you find that yourself? Have you helped other people with that challenge at all?
Personally, it hasn't been too difficult for me, I would say. But for other people, it's, kind of like you said, that's a great example of something that is pretty common, unfortunately. There's all these expectations surrounding being thankful and demonstrating that thankfulness in a very specific way. And if you don't do those things, you're kind of considered a jerk. And that might not be true, and in a lot of cases, it's not true. The kid's not trying to come off as a jerk. They just are struggling with the, unmet expectation, kind of like what you said. And then B, they might not know how to communicate it in a way that is palatable to the adults around them.
I think it's a weird thing when you speak about it in your book and you're talking about expectations. I think for a lot of us, we don't always realize the number of expectations that are put on people. They're almost completely non-conscious, aren't they? That we're just they're just there. So, as I say, giving somebody a gift is meant to be really nice, but suddenly turn it round, you've immediately set an expectation on them or they feel an anxiety of what do you expect from me from this and stuff. As far as, do you support parents as well then through the journey of this? Is this something that you engage and support families?
Yeah, a lot of my colleagues focus pretty heavily on parent training. I'll do a lot of parent training webinars. I speak to parents in large groups kind of around the country when I travel. I kind of will field parent questions as they come in. I get a lot of messages from parents. So I would say most of my parent interaction is either virtual or takes place at conferences, just because I'm always kind of bouncing around from different things throughout the day.
Yeah. So you tend to work with the individuals themselves or
Yep.
people themselves. So what kind of things do you coach them in then to help them through the journey of especially this kind of time of year?
A lot of it is kind of working on those social cause and effect pieces. So talking about what's going to happen in the future and how other people might respond to different choices that we might make. So for example, I've got a young man who is kind of working through, he's very particular in how he likes things done. He really likes to play games. He's very competitive and he wants to play with someone who he perceives to be an equal match in terms of skill level. He's very athletic and he only wants to play athletic games with people who are equally athletic.
Right.
And when they are not equally athletic, we are working on providing constructive criticism rather than destructive criticism. And so kind of working through that social cause and effect of, hey, if you really want to play with so-and-so, but so-and-so misses the ball and you tell him he plays like a baby, what's going to happen? Well, he's probably going to feel upset. He might say no next time I invite him to play. And kind of working through that cause and effect before it happens can be really helpful in setting those expectations.
I think that's one of the things that is it maybe a stereotype around individuals on the spectrum as far as the slightly outspoken honesty, as far as, somebody not being very good. It's not just a case of, it's okay, you're getting better. It's a case that you're rubbish.
Yep.
And therefore, and that's it, that fixed kind of thinking. And that sometimes gives a misconcept, doesn't it? That individuals on the autistic spectrum don't experience empathy. And I know that you mentioned that specifically, and something I've touched on many times as well. So do you want to kind of clear that up of your thoughts around empathy and autism?
It's tricky because people's values, I think, can sometimes look different, and that might cloud the traditional view of empathy. So in the example with the young man who's very athletic, it could look as though he's not feeling empathetic towards his classmates who are maybe struggling more in that area. But if you kind of look into his personal values, he really values precision. He values competition. And so to say that he's unempathetic might be unfair just because it doesn't take into account his personal values. And we all have different personal values, right? And so for him to get kind of dinged in the area of humanity just because his personal values don't align with somebody else's, to me seems a bit unfair. The other piece of that is to have empathy, you have to understand what other people are thinking and experiencing and know that that's different from your own. So when people say autistic people don't have empathy, they might be struggling to understand someone else's point of view. And it's kind of hard to say that they don't have empathy if they truly don't understand how someone else is thinking or feeling. Like, you need that step first before you can get to empathy. So it's a very complicated topic, I think. And saying that people don't have empathy is a broad overgeneralization that is largely incorrect.
Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge, and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description. Again, it's a slight misnomer, isn't it? Misunderstanding, and say lack of understanding of what empathy truly is. As far as it's not that this. If we use the lad you were mentioning there, it's not that he doesn't care about anybody else's feelings. The value you think is quite interesting, actually. That's an interesting kind of extra that I hadn't necessarily thought about. But I'm sure if he realised he was really upsetting somebody else, he would never intend to do that.
Right.
However, so he can feel the feelings. He just can't necessarily associate.
Yeah, he doesn't understand where this other person is coming from. Because from his perspective, they're making a choice. I've made the choice to be good, and you've made the choice to be bad, and I just don't understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting you know that you're rubbish. You probably already know you're rubbish, but I don't know why you're choosing to be rubbish.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And therefore not recognizing this person who maybe thinks they're trying really hard and they're just
correct,
beaten up as a result of it. 100%. How do you find it though within the interactions within? Because one of the principles is I don't know if you've ever heard of the double empathy problem, where individuals who are neurotypical sometimes struggle to put themselves in the shoes of those who are neurodivergent, but vice versa. So it's a case of not being able to see each other's points of view. Do you often find when you do get individuals who are all on the spectrum together, do you find they better relate to each other? Do they have better ways of understanding those points of view?
Sometimes. I find that that's more often the case in our older groups of people. Our older teenagers are sometimes that way. But I mean, I hate to be the pessimist here that kind of rains on the parade, but if I had to give a general answer to that question, I would say no. That a lot of times it means actually the opposite, that they truly do not understand where the other person is coming from. So for a common example that we face in lots of different support settings is, one person will be stimming in one way and another person might be stimming in another way. And the two people can't stand each other because your stimming annoys me and your stimming annoys me and you're doing it wrong. And if you would just shut up, the world would be peaceful. And the disconnect there can be very disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that leads into, do many of the individuals you support, are they in mainstream education or for the age? No, so most of them in special education needs. Some
of them, yeah. Some of them we only provide therapy services to, and they don't go to school at all. For our school program specifically, the school program is only for students on the autism spectrum. So it is, separate from mainstream. It's a private school.
Yeah, because I should imagine you've had to really explore like the nature of communication, for instance. Is that you said you're quite you've always been quite confident or competent as far as your communication skills concerned, but have you learned a lot through your journey as far as actually I didn't realize that bit, Yeah,
I would say so. I think one of the reasons I really like working with teenagers is that it was relatively recent, if you look at the timeline of events, that I had personally been learning those skills myself. And I find that, sometimes I feel that I'm better qualified to teach some of these social skills just because, a lot of my neurotypical coworkers, they just know these things. But if you challenge them on it, they have a hard time explaining the mechanics of social skills, whereas I had to learn everything manually. And so it's very easy for me to kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct in my explanation and my teaching because I had to do it the hard way. Whereas everybody around me, well, they just kind of woke up and knew it. So they kind of have a difficult time explaining it to other people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I suppose it's like if you just naturally knew how to play tennis, you just do it, don't you? Or like I always use the example of folding my arms. I don't think about how to do it. I never learned how to do it. I just fold my arms. But if you weren't able to do that and you had to learn the skill, you would have had to have broken it down and analyzed it. And and then working on teaching it to somebody else is a whole new breakdown again, isn't it? As far as really analyzing it and helping it. Obviously, you didn't get a diagnosis until you were 10 years old. Did things change? Can you remember as far as whether things changed for you from your diagnosis? Did you have hard times before without understanding or? Did it change things in any way for you?
Yeah, I was in a small private school originally, and I was failing miserably. And how you fail the second and third grade, I don't know, but I found a way. I did do that, which is pretty wild. I also have a lot of learning disabilities. And so a lot of my struggles were academic. And that is kind of what I guess triggered my parents and the school to be like, hey, something's not right here. And then once we came back with that evaluation, the small private school said, oh, well, we can't help you anymore. And you should not enroll in fourth grade the following year because we don't have the resources for it. And so that kind of sparked a huge shift because instead of going to school, I was homeschooled by my mother, and she hired a specialized tutor to help me read. She was certified in the Orton-Gillingham approach, which is one of the few evidence-based interventions for dyslexia. And I met with her 2 to 3 times a week for several years. And that is the only reason I can read today.
Right. Okay. But that's so strange, isn't it? As far as the only reason you can read today, but then you're an author.
Right. As far as, crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And writing stuff and putting stuff out there on social media and obviously then technician and stuff like that. It's a wild journey from maybe, do you think you've exceeded maybe your own expectations, and especially maybe other people's as well?
Oh, sure. They told my parents when I was diagnosed that I would never drive a car, that I might never have a job, that I might never live by myself. And
wow.
Yeah. So I certainly kind of surpassed those expectations for sure.
Yeah. Do you think that's quite common for individuals, on the autistic spectrum, or is that an old mentality towards autism that's getting better?
I think it can happen still. A lot of times with the diagnostic evaluation comes an IQ test. Right. And for me personally, because of my learning disabilities, if you can't read very well, you're not going to perform very well on an IQ test. So my IQ at the time was measured to be about 80, which is pretty low.
Yeah.
but is not reflective or a good metric to really demonstrate the capacity, maybe the ability at the time, but not the capacity for improvement. And so I suppose they're only going off the numbers that they can see, but those numbers are not always a great capture of what's really going on.
Yeah, that's quite, obviously we've moved a long way as far as, moving over to the autism spectrum rather than having those separate diagnoses. And one of the things that maybe some of our listeners and viewers aren't aware, obviously when it used to be autism and Asperger's, one of the reasons that they had that differential is individuals with Asperger's or the diagnosis of Asperger's tended to have slightly higher levels of communication. And because of that, they tended to have an assumption that they had a higher level of intelligence. And it isn't until, we've managed to find technological ways of like using iPads and things like that found that some individuals who don't speak, that doesn't mean they're not intelligent. They just weren't able to communicate their intelligence in a way that we thought was typical. And that's definitely, as you say, your IQ is classed as being low, but obviously it isn't. It's just a case of you didn't meet their particular metrics of how they thought it should be measured or how they were able to measure it at that particular time. I think perspectives have definitely changed around that. And obviously you've been on a bit of a journey yourself and obviously a big advocator as far as those living with autism. As far as, have you noticed a change socially in attitude towards generally the neurodivergent, but particularly those on the autistic spectrum?
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of our efforts are really paying off. I've not encountered too many people, and, I don't know that I'm a good one to measure this because in the circles that I'm in, most people are just kind of by default kind and accepting. So for me to say that like, oh yeah, most people are kind and accepting, I don't know if that's entirely true globally. But my experience in the most recent years, talking about my diagnosis has been largely positive.
Is there ever still any myths or misnomers that you come across that you have to educate people about at all?
I think the biggest one would just be the breadth of the autism spectrum, and that, just because somebody struggles with communication, kind of like what you were saying, doesn't mean that they're unintelligent. And then conversely, just because someone communicates very well does not mean that they have advanced skills in a particular area. So just getting people to kind of understand that, again, everybody is an individual.
So just to cover a little bit on, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing a little bit about your day-to-day then, what kind of activities and what kind of things do you spend time doing with your, maybe focusing on the teenagers that you work with the most, to kind of help them?
Day to day, my schedule is kind of crazy. I see clients twice a week. I've got other days where I'm working on social media content. I manage the social media page for Project Hope as well as my own, which is a lot of work. So I'm writing content, I'm editing content, I'm working with my specific clients on those 2 days. I'm going to conferences, I'm doing virtual presentations. My day-to-day is varies quite a bit depending on which specific day. Definitely.
So, what is as far as the content that you're putting out then, or the engagement that you're doing, is it activities? Is it, as you said, it's not really just talking therapy, it's kind of then teaching new things. So can you give me a couple of examples of some of the things that you do, or some of the, maybe an exercise that you tend to do?
Sure. A lot of times, especially with folks who have a lot more language abilities, we try and structure our sessions so that we don't get bored or there's not excessive downtime. And a lot of the times that looks like creating a schedule with the client. And sometimes the clients will create their own schedule. I've had that several times where, here's a whiteboard, here's a marker, write down 5 things you want to do, and we'll get it all done in the next 2 hours. So it's a good way to spend time, we'll go to the gym. We've got a big gym where the kids can play. We've got a big playground. We've got 42 acres of land. We can kind of walk around and explore. So that's really nice. We will sometimes pick activities with other kids. Maybe we'll get together and play a board game or play Legos. And there's a lot of social skills embedded in that. You can work on turn taking, you can work on negotiating, you can work on compromising. There's a lot of skills. So it might look like, oh, well, we're just playing or we're just babysitting, but we're not. We're very intentionally working on things that people need help with. So if you're working with someone who struggles with turn taking, you're probably going to see them play a lot of games. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities to practice in a way that's not going to cause distress, but a way that's going to maybe push somebody just enough to where they can kind of grow and and exceed maybe those expectations that were maybe originally put on them.
That's really good. It's one of the things I kind of encourage in a lot of the world I'm from is the play is so important. And you're right, it doesn't have to be infantilized. It's more about, as you say, there's so much we learn from such simple games. Is that something then that you'd encourage? And do you think that's something people are missing out, whether it be parents and teachers particularly? They're maybe missing out on that. They're too busy trying to teach rather than using play as a form of teaching.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's kind of a double-edged sword because a lot of times, especially in special education programs, they'll pull kids aside and they'll just talk to them. Well, this is what it means to take a turn, and this is what it means to compromise, and this is what it means to negotiate. And they just lecture them. But then when they put them in the real world and they give them the opportunity to do it, the kid explodes and they're not successful. And so the one kind of leads to the other because the teachers find that, well, when I give you the games, you can't handle it. But then when I give you this instruction, you can handle it, but maybe you're not learning anything. So they feel kind of stuck. And so it's really important to kind of find that balance of not pushing people past their limits. We're not trying to break people, right? We just want to get them to a place where they can be successful. And sometimes that does include a little bit of extra support, not just kind of throwing them to the wolves and hoping that they figure it out the hard way.
Do you find that works for adults as well? Do you find that kind of similar strategy? Yeah. I think, adults, we love to play. We just sometimes don't like to admit that we like to play.
Yep.
I think it was one of the things, wasn't it, as far as a potential criticism, which I think I saw you kind of manage or deal with, or you spoke out about around the Netflix program, the Dating on the Spectrum, was that is there an infantilization around it? The same with the play. Do you find some people do find or are a little bit sensitive to what they perceive as infantilization that actually is a positive thing?
Oh, I don't know. I find that the people that I work with are usually very happy to have, playful types of engagement. And especially coming from a school setting, I am pulling them out of classrooms where they've just been doing a math worksheet or they've been doing a reading assignment or they've been working on a science project and they're kind of happy to get a break from that. It's a relief. So even though we're still working on skills and we're still learning things, that play can be kind of a relief from some of the harder work and the more strenuous demands that was maybe happening before I got there.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit in a moment about your book as far as and whether you have any plans for future. But obviously you do an awful lot of work on your social media channel. I didn't realize you did the one for the Hope Foundation as well. So yeah, you are busy coming up with content. What would you say are probably the most commonly asked, maybe like top 3 most commonly asked questions or requests that you get around the stuff you put on social media?
That's a hard one. I get a lot of specific questions. People will say, how do I, my child is 5. He has, he engages in a lot of aggression. He hits me when I tell him it's time to go or when he needs to clean up. And it's challenging helping people with specific questions, especially as it pertains to someone I've never met before, right? It's hard for me to give advice without seeing or knowing this person. And so I always want to help. And I also don't want to sound repetitive or like an ad because my answer is always get the book. And it's not because I'm like trying to sell the book because, complete transparency. I get roughly $2 for every book sale. It's not worth it to me. I mean, I make money other ways. It's not about the book. It's not about the money. But as a tangible resource, it's definitely something I feel very passionate about. So a lot of times you'll see me in the comments respond, get the book, get the book, get the book. And I mean that because that is the most tangible way I can offer help to somebody that I don't know.
Yeah. So would you say that number one is it, because it's definitely a big challenge for many parents, isn't it? Is the kind of the parent related violence or aggression where it's this, not sure what they're doing wrong, but they don't seem to be getting it right. And that's such a frustrating thing for many parents, isn't it? But it's so much frustrating thing for the individual living with the condition as well. That is 2 people being frustrated that are just getting that mismatch somewhere. And that's where there is some really good advice in the book as far as promoting communication, better understanding the person you're supporting and things like that.
Yeah.
So that was one of them. Is that the main one then? The very specific situations is what you tend to get most.
Yeah, it's the very specific individual situations.
And as you say, it's difficult to give an answer on because there's so many variables.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to give something concrete.
Do you get much asked about sensory processing and things like that?
Yeah, a lot of times people will ask, what's your favorite fidget, or what types of headphones do you recommend? Which ones do you use personally? And I'm always happy to answer. I feel like no matter how many times I'll answer the question, they're still going to ask me. So it's kind of a frustrating one because it doesn't matter how many times I put it out. They're always going to ask, which is fine. And, I'm happy to give recommendations of what I like, but it's just people have to understand what I like is maybe not what you like. And so I can answer the question, but it doesn't mean that you're going to like the same thing.
I suppose it's quite strange in some ways, isn't it? If that is individuals who are neurodiverse asking the question, they are asking for a very, very concrete and explicit answer to a question to better understand their autistic child. And actually, if they reviewed that question themselves and went, why am I wanting this very fixed answer to this rather than really exploring all the various options?
Right.
And that's kind of, that's almost a little ironic, isn't it? Going, I want to better understand them. And therefore I've got this very specific way I want it answering. Yep. Actually going,
that's right.
You understand your kid better than you realise. Okay, so your book, and it is a fantastic resource, and I have got it next to me down here. I was flicking through a little bit before you kind of came on. So yeah, Life on the Bridge, and it's a very nice photograph, by the way, looking lovely. As far as and it is quite a nice, easy resource that it is quite kind of you can dip into and kind of the different chapters touching on little challenges, little difficulties. I did like separate a few pages out and things like that. That I thought, that's quite good. There was one exercise actually I didn't get a chance to properly kind of look through. I'll ask you about it now, actually, if you can remember it. I feel like I'm quizzing you on your own book.
Yeah, I hope I know what you're talking about.
It was blocks. It was using Lego, and you'd written, I have, I like this one.
Yep.
Can you see that? Okay. Yeah. So do you want to just, the conversation tower, that's it. Would you mind telling us what that's about and how you use it? And because it looks like quite an interesting game.
Yeah. So I was working with a little guy who was able to speak in short sentences, but not really able to have conversation. And it was something that he had tried to do a couple of times with some people, and it just hadn't gone well because he didn't have the words to communicate back and forth with them. So we had just kind of created this exercise to demonstrate, one, the turn taking, and two, what a statement could sound like, especially when you're talking about things that you're interested in. And so I would write the beginning of the statement on the blocks, kind of like you see in the picture, I like, and then you would finish the statement just by saying the rest of it. So you'd put your block down and it says, I like. And so, for example, if it were my turn, I would put down a block and I would say, I like dogs. Your turn. So then I would give him the I like block, and he might say, I like trains, and stack it on top. And so then I would do the I can statement. I can swing really high. And so then it would be his turn, and he would get the can block and stack it on top of my can block. And he might say, I can run really fast. Some basic examples of, exchanges that somebody might have, again, at a very basic level that could kind of portray their interests and help them connect with other people.
Yeah, that's yeah. And as you say, it's teaching that turn taking, but it's also really kind of helping that I do first and then you can repeat, rather than feeling tested and, again, high expectations of them. You're setting them up to win rather than setting up to fail. So, yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's appreciated. That one, just as I was flicking through, I was like, but I didn't get time to read it. Yeah, I didn't get time to read it as we were kind of before you came on. So I'll be looking afterwards. So have you got plans for any more books, or what else does the future hold for you?
Probably. I think my publisher really was insistent on including that we are in the process of working on a second book. That process hasn't gotten officially started yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen eventually. Okay.
Have you got an idea of what it's going to be about or what you're hoping to do next?
I don't know. I kind of flip-flop back and forth. Before this book was published, I had said that I wanted to write something a little bit more clinical, intended for therapists and teachers and professionals, something that was a little bit more specific and more instructional and maybe more, just heavier on the how-to, I guess, from a clinical perspective. But I kind of flip-flop back and forth between that and then wanting to do just an expansion of this, just the same kind of thing that I did. I wrote it for a general audience that anybody could pick it up and understand it and read it without the clinical jargon. Meaning that a clinical person could pick it up and get something out of it, but so could a parent, and so could an autistic person, and so could somebody who's not necessarily in that world, because that jargon can sometimes be a huge barrier to people's understanding. And so it was really important to me to write it in a very broad way that's going to be easy to understand. So I flip-flop between wanting to go hard one way or go the other way, and I don't know.
You're still playing with those two ideas. And I'm maybe one and then the other later or something. Maybe it'll be both. If the publisher's got anything to do with it, more than likely, if there's 2 books in you, they'll get those 2 books out. I'm sure. And are you hoping to continue or expand as far as your social media is concerned, or are you doing anything else? Because do you deliver talks as well?
I do. Yeah. Somebody told me the number that I had done this year, and I forgot. I think it was somewhere in the 30s or 40s that I had delivered 30 or 40 talks this year, at both virtual and in person. And so I travel a lot. I would say between 1 and 3 times per month, I'm on a plane going somewhere.
That's cool, though. That's a bit different. So that's life changing from maybe what you were doing before.
Oh yeah.
Joining and joining heroes like Temple Grandin, kind of in similar formats and similar stages and stuff like that, which must feel quite amazing in some ways. So, okay. So, as far as we'll keep our eye out for the book then in the future, to kind of just draw us to a close, I'm just going to final putting you on the spot. I want to try and get these last kind of squeeze those last tips out. Is there anything that you know now that maybe you wish people who had known you when you were 10 or just before you got your diagnosis? What's the kind of the biggest, maybe couple of tips that you would hope that you think people should know about to better prove connections and relationships with those with autism?
I think for me personally, back when I was, 10 probably, because that was a challenging time in my life. Failing the 3rd grade kind of crushes your self-esteem just a little bit. I had a very negative view of myself, and I don't know that I would say that I was suicidal, but I was certainly making concerning statements like, I don't know why I've been put on this earth, which is kind of a really terrible and sad thing for somebody that young to even conceptualize, right? And this was back before YouTube was a thing, so I wasn't regurgitating something I had heard in a video. This was coming from the inside, which is kind of really terrible. And it was just a result of those persistent, not meeting expectations. And so not to say that lowering expectations is always the answer, but just making expectations attainable and watching for kids who are maybe missing those expectations and keeping an eye on that and adjusting that as needed, because it can really impact someone's self-esteem, which can kind of carry through into adulthood if it's not mitigated.
Yeah, that's such an important message. It is the more we understand, the self-esteem levels, the mental health conditions that many individuals on the autistic spectrum experience because of the not meeting expectations, because not because people are bad, because people are a little bit ignorant. If I'm not choosing not to listen if I'm in sensory overload, it's because I've got so much information to process before I can get to you.
Right.
And it's not being rude or being dismissive. I'm just working 10 times harder than the average person would to kind of be able to do the same thing. So yeah, that's a huge thing, isn't it? So obviously you're doing an awful lot of work as far as raising awareness and being an advocate for those on the spectrum, both from succeeding in your professional life and doing amazing things and becoming world known. I mean, that's it. You're crossing the Atlantic Ocean now as far as podcasts are concerned, as well as obviously, writing your books and stuff like that. So I think obviously I love the stuff that you're doing on social media. I think it's fantastic. And there's some lovely I highly recommend following just those little nuggets that you give. They're just that simple solution to a problem to just try. Even if it doesn't work for your kid, it's worth having an arsenal of different tools, isn't it?
Right.
So I don't know whether there's anything else you would like to kind of just finish off or any message you want to send, but I've really enjoyed having a chat with you. It's been fantastic to meet you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've got anything like that stands out in this moment. I don't know.
That's okay. No, we've gone on quite a journey, I feel.
Sure, yeah.
Any of you who've been watching or listening to anything, please go out and check out Kaelynn's book, as well as checking out the social media. We'll put links in our show notes as well as in the description on the YouTube channel so that you can link it over. And hopefully I'll link in with you as well so we can then get that information out there. Do pop questions in to myself, or we'll get them passed on if we can. Not too specific, remember, try and keep them general. But if you have found anything in today's episode useful or interesting, please like, comment and share. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. And thank you again, Kaelynn. It's a pleasure to meet you. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behavior that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behavior can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later, wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviors that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behavior. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience, and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviors in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation, and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.